Good evening, everybody. My name is Ware Harmon. I'm the Executive Director of Town Hall Seattle. On behalf of our staff and our friends at Island Press, it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's talk by Todd Litman. It was Litman, sorry. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we are very glad that you've joined us for tonight's virtual event. I make the distinction virtual, since I hope you've gotten the word by now that we're also presenting live events in the building, as well as hybrid events, which are, well, they're probably exactly what you think they are. At any rate, we're grateful when you're with us, no matter where you are, you know what I mean? The talk will run 60 minutes, including Q&A. To streamline our audience experiences, we've changed the Q&A platform for our events. To submit your question, please enter meet.ps/Litman, L-I-T-M-A-N, or scan the QR code right now on the screen with your smartphone. We'll drop this link in the chat and remind folks again later when we get to the Q&A about exactly how you do the Q&A. We can't guarantee we'll be able to address every question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. So, and any of you who want to view the program with closed captions, please click the CC button in the bottom right corner of your video player. Town Hall's adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming events include David Wessel's expose on who exactly benefits from the so-called opportunity zones created by Trump-era tax cuts, Paige Harden on why DNA matters for social equality, Obama advisor Beth Simone Novak with practical ways to recenter government around actually solving public problems, as well as upcoming appearances by Susan Orlean and soon-to-be-announced Neil Stevenson. Visit our website to join our email list and to get the latest updates as more programs are added constantly throughout the season. Constantly is a stretch, but you get my point. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our civics programs are supported by the Real Networks Foundation, the True Brown Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation Northwest. But as you likely know, Town Hall is, beneath it all, a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching tonight. If you share Town Hall's vision of a community strengthened by inquiries into politics, science, and culture, we hope you'll consider supporting us with a donation or by becoming a member yourself. Last, you're likely here tonight because you're interested in the details of transportation policy, so I know you'll want to go deeper into tonight's topic by purchasing your own copy of Todd Litman's book. Please use the link in the chat below to pick up your copy through Island Press. The code Litman, L-I-T-M-A-N, will give you a 20% discount. And with that, Todd Litman is a founder and executive director of the Victoria Transport Policy Institute, an independent research organization dedicated to developing innovative solutions to transit problems. He's worked as a research and planning consultant for a diverse range of clients, including government agencies, professional organizations, developers, and non-government organizations in more than 24 countries. Todd is also a university lecturer and holds a Master of Environmental Studies from the Evergreen State College just down the road. See what I did there? Road, sorry. Anyway, his new book, New Mobilities, Smart Planning for Emerging Transportation Technologies, is the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Todd Litman.
Thank you, Ware. Greetings from Victoria, British Columbia. I'm going to be talking about a range of innovative transportation technologies and services that are likely to affect our lives in the future. So this is based on my book, based on research I did for my book, New Mobilities, Smart Planning for Emerging Transportation Technologies. And it just so happens this week, Island Press is offering a 50% discount on all of their books. So this is a chance for you to stock up on books. If you miss this opportunity, you can get a 30% discount by putting the code webinar into the discount cell if you order books from Island Press. So we're talking about the future, but it's fun to go back and think about previous predictions of what our transportation system was going to look like. And so I like to go and look at the articles and the covers of various old magazines, Popular Mechanics and Popular Science. And you'll see a majority of the covers have something to do with transportation. Transportation affects our lives in so many ways and is often the way that new technologies get dispersed into throughout our lives and our economies. So things like airplanes and cars and public transit innovations and flying cars. These are things that were predicted in the past, and now we're facing a new set of these transportation innovations. And so I'm going to be talking about a dozen of them. They include active and micro modes, bike sharing and car sharing, ride hailing, electric and autonomous vehicles, public transit improvements, aviation innovations like flying cars, tunnel roads, pneumatic tube transport, mobility as a service, telework, mobility prioritization, and logistics management. So let's go into some of these things. What my book explores and what we're going to discuss tonight is how communities should approach these. What questions should we ask when a new technology or a new transportation service is being considered in your community? So things like, what are their costs and benefits, and who is impacted? And is that fair? And who should bear their costs and risks? And how should we integrate them into our transportation system? And so we can ask, when a particular new technology or service is being proposed, should it be mandated, encouraged, regulated, restricted, or forbidden? And so there are a number of specific factors that we should consider when we're looking at these innovations. And in my book, I do this systematically. For each of the new mobilities being considered, I look at things like what's their stage of development, what's the user experience like? So is it comfortable or secure, convenient? What are the impacts on total travel? How does it affect our travel speeds and our travel time? User costs, infrastructure costs, congestion costs, risk and accident risks imposed on others, social equity objectives, resource consumption, does it increase or reduce energy, fuel consumption, and pollution emissions? How does it affect our fitness and health? Does it affect our chance of spreading infections, contagions, effects on our strategic planning goals? So these are all impacts or perspectives that should be considered when we're evaluating these new modes. Let me give you an example of the type of discussion that I explore in my book and that I think communities need to consider. There's a lot of excitement about autonomous vehicles, and advocates claim that they're going to solve many of our transportation problems, that they're going to reduce traffic congestion and accidents and infrastructure costs. But many of those benefits depend on those vehicles having dedicated traffic lanes where a large number of autonomous vehicles can drive close together. They platoon is the term engineers use. And so for many of these benefits to occur, government agencies, your transportation agency will have to decide at what point we should dedicate a valuable traffic lane specifically to autonomous vehicle use. And one of the public policy questions is, should users have to pay and how much? And who's liable if one of those platoons with, say, a dozen or 2 dozen vehicles all driving within a couple feet of each other? What happens if one of them crashes? Does it change our liability? What is fair and efficient? That's what we explore. Another example is electric vehicles. Now, we're right in the transition point where electric vehicle technology is becoming reliable and increasingly affordable. And a lot of jurisdictions are relying on vehicle electrification to achieve their climate emission reduction targets. But there's some problems that need to be recognized in electric vehicles. For one thing, because they're cheaper to drive, they tend to increase total vehicle travel. Somebody that might have driven 10,000 miles last year, if they go to an electric car and it's cheaper to drive, they might drive 12 or 14,000 kilometers. There's also significant emissions and energy embodied in the production of the vehicles and the production of the electricity that they use and the infrastructure that they use. And electric vehicles do nothing to reduce traffic congestion or parking costs or traffic accidents. And so there's some good questions. How much should communities be willing to subsidize vehicle electrification, the vehicle fleet? And who should finance those subsidies? And how can we prevent the problems associated with the increased vehicle travel, the induced vehicle travel that can result? So these are all issues that need to be discussed, that communities should be thinking about as we see these new technologies and services become available. I like to go back and look at the historical conditions. What's happened over the last century or so? So here's an interesting detail. Before 1900, people relied primarily on walking, and the average person traveled about 1,000 miles a year. That was mainly walking, a little bit of public transit, a little bit of horse and bicycle travel, but mainly people were walking. And but during the last century, we've increased that by an order of magnitude. The average person now travels about 10,000 annual miles. That increase in mobility imposed a lot of costs. It increased the cost to you, the user. You have to own and operate a car. It requires road and parking infrastructure. We're expecting governments to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars a year per vehicle to provide roadway capacity, and we're expecting businesses to provide thousands of dollars a year per vehicle to provide off-street parking. So yes, our mobility has increased, but so have a lot of costs. And there are many ways to look at these costs. I do a lot of analysis of transportation costing, and you can categorize them in terms of internal costs, that is the cost to the user, and you can break those down into the fixed costs, the costs that such as vehicle purchases and insurance that really aren't directly affected by how much you drive, and then the variable vehicle costs. Things like fuel consumption and tire wear. And then there are a number of external costs, the costs of providing infrastructure and the costs of accident risk and congestion and air pollution and noise imposed on other people. And the point, this graph here makes an important point, and that is walking, bicycling, e-bikes, and public transit have far lower total costs than the costs of accommodating automobile travel. And electric cars are no cheaper. They have higher initial costs. They're a little bit cheaper to operate, but they do nothing to reduce the external cost, most of the external costs. They reduce air pollution, but they don't do anything to reduce roadway costs or parking requirements or accident risk or congestion. So it's important to take those into account as we look at the innovative transportation technologies and services. There's another interesting way to look at this, and that is how fast do they go? And there are many ways to actually measure travel speed. One of them is what we call nominal speed. That is how fast you travel in your car. But another way to look at speeds is what we call effective speeds. And this is your travel distance divided by the time you spend traveling plus the time you spend earning money for your vehicle. And when measured by effective speeds, automobile travel are actually quite often slower than other modes, particularly for lower income people. For somebody that's earning $12 or $15 an hour, they're often spending more time working to earn money for their car than they are spending driving it, or at least driving it to work. And so for many, especially lower income people, walking and public transit are actually faster measured this way. And policies that force people to own a car are quite regressive. They force people to spend more money than they can afford to own and operate their vehicles and to travel. Okay, so let's look at some of these specific new mobilities. Now, active and micro modes, that is things like bicycles and e-bikes and electric scooters, they're not totally new, but in many communities, it's new to make concerted efforts to significantly improve active and micro modes and to integrate them, for example, to make sure that that a public transit station has very convenient bicycle access, or that there are places you can store your scooter. There's also vehicle sharing, so car sharing, scooter sharing, bike sharing, which allows at least some people to reduce their need to own vehicles. So in some cases, the bike sharing and car sharing, vehicle sharing, allow households to reduce vehicle ownership and rely more on shared vehicles. Another of the new mobilities is ride hailing and taxi service improvements, and what we call micro taxis or micro transit. That's small buses or vans that carry that carry passengers like public transit, but are often much more flexible. They can vary their route. Currently, ride hailing, Uber and Lyft, are somewhat less expensive than conventional taxi services, but those companies are actually losing money. And over time, they're going to need to, they're likely to increase some of their fares. So the difference between taxi and ride hailing is probably going to change. But no question, the new apps and taxi apps and ride hailing apps can significantly increase the convenience and in some cases reduce the costs of this type of service. There's a lot that we can do to improve, to use new technologies and integrated services to improve public transit. You can increase the convenience by having better navigation services, apps that tell you exactly when a bus is or a train is going to arrive and how to connect between different routes, and automated payment systems for your mobile phone pays your fare using RFID, so you don't even have to pull your phone out of your pocket. There are many technologies that can increase the speed of loading and operation. There's things we can do to increase the comfort of stations and the vehicles and amenities, such as onboard Wi-Fi service. We can make public transit more affordable. We can integrate public transit with other modes. So, for example, your train station or your bus stop have bike sharing and car sharing. And there's a lot that we can do to improve the marketing and raise the social status of using public transit. Now, one of the new transportation technologies that's getting an awful lot of attention is autonomous vehicles, and often we talk about autonomous electric vehicles, self-driving cars, or robocars, we sometimes describe them. And those can include cars, trucks, and buses. Yeah, I'm going to give this a special attention because it's such a hot issue. It's the transportation innovation that's been getting the most attention. So in my analysis, I look at how soon we're likely to have autonomous vehicles. And it takes a long time for the fleet, that is for the bulk of the vehicles out there to change over time. So because vehicles, most people don't buy a new vehicle simply because a new technology becomes available. They wait until they're going to buy a new vehicle anyway, and then they buy the state of the art. Optimistically, autonomous vehicle technology will become available in this decade. So perhaps by 2026, 2028, you could actually go to a dealership and buy a self-driving car that can operate what we call level 5 autonomy. It means they can operate autonomously under most conditions and drive people without without having a qualified driver in the vehicle at all. But even if those vehicles do become available this decade, it's going to take 2030s, 2040s before they are reliable and can operate under all normal conditions, before they become affordable, and particularly before they become common enough in the vehicle fleet that there's a good used vehicle market for these. And so the middle and lower income households that rely on used vehicles will be able to purchase a self-driving car. Now, there are certainly some direct benefits to users from autonomous vehicles. There's less stress. You can have some cost savings compared with, say, hiring a chauffeur or a taxi. Passengers can get some work done, and somebody who, for whatever reason, can't drive could purchase a self-driving car as a way to get around. That's great, but they're probably not going to be that cheap. The equipment and the additional testing and certification is going to add significant costs. And so self-driving cars will probably cost a little bit more to own than, or somewhat more to own and operate than your current car. And a self-driving taxi will probably be cheaper than a current taxi, but certainly will cost more than owning your own car. You are going to have to pay more, and so it is unlikely. It is an exaggeration to assume that self-driving vehicles are going to make vehicle travel affordable and convenient for everybody. Now, there's going to be one of the big debates is whether people will shift from owning cars to relying entirely on self-driving taxis or own their own self-driving cars. And there are a number of reasons that a lot of people, particularly residents of suburban and rural areas, are likely to choose to own their own self-driving car rather than rely on taxis. It's going to be inconvenient in a suburban area. You probably have to wait 10 or 15 minutes typically for a car that you order to arrive, where if you own your own self-driving car, it would be in your driveway. And people often store things. They have a child seat or a rack for their sports equipment or other things that or tools. Workers will have tools in their cars that make it much more convenient to own your own rather than to have to rely on a rental, a self-driving taxi. So self-driving cars are probably, owning a self-driving car is going to be cheaper than relying on taxis if you're going to travel more than about 6,000 or 7,000 kilometers a year, or 6,000 or 7,000 miles a year. So for people who live automobile dependent lifestyles in suburban areas, it will seem cheaper to own and operate your own self-driving cars. There's also a lot of discussion about the safety impacts. Now, optimists predict that because about 90% of all crashes involve some sort of human error, self-driving cars will reduce crashes by 90%. But that's ignoring the additional risks that self-driving technology will introduce. Things like hardware and software failures, malicious hacking, increased risk-taking by other road users if they assume that all the cars on the road are gonna have that self-driving potential. The additional risks from the platooning when large numbers of vehicles are operating very close together, and the additional crashes that result if autonomous vehicles stimulate additional vehicle travel. More travel equals more crashes. Here's an interesting question. What about congestion? Self-driving vehicles by themselves are unlikely to significantly reduce traffic congestion. In fact, in many ways, they're likely to increase it. For example, if you have a self-driving car, chauffeurs you to work, and if you live in an area where you have to pay for park, or you work in an area where you have to pay for parking, you're likely to send your car home. It'll drive home, or have it circle the block continuously rather than pay for a parking space. And that means that for each mile that you're being transported, each vehicle mile of functional travel, there's another vehicle mile where that car is driving empty back home or circling the block. So autonomous vehicles could actually significantly increase traffic congestion unless we implement policies that discourage people from using autonomous vehicles to increase their vehicle travel. There's also significant infrastructure costs. So who's going to pay for the additional road lanes, or what should we charge? So here's my prediction. Here's my simple prediction of how soon some of these benefits are likely to occur. During, say, the 2020s, this decade, wealthy people might be able to buy self-driving cars that will reduce their stress and provide more independent mobility for those who can afford it. There may also be some significant benefits if self-driving buses can reduce the cost or increase the quality of service for public transportation. But it'll probably be the 2040s or 2050s before self-driving cars are broadly available for middle and lower income households that rely on the used vehicle market. And it'll take many years or decades before they significantly reduce traffic congestion and accidents. That's the point in which there'll be enough self-driving cars that we will have special traffic lanes. Most highways might have special traffic lanes. So it's going to take a long time. That's my message. Let's look at some of the other new mobilities examined in my book. There's telework. That's the general term for telecommuting, using telecommunications to substitute for physical travel. It can include things like e-business and e-learning and e-medicine. And there's certainly some benefits. It reduces some of our travel. Particularly, it can reduce peak period travel and therefore traffic congestion. It means people can work at home, have more flexible schedules, but there's some disadvantages. Users need more equipment costs and they need space. And for many workers, it means that they're feeling isolated. It can increase sprawl. Many people, some people might use their ability to telework to move further away, and that requires additional travel when they're running errands. And it's unsuitable for many workers, especially low-income workers who may live in crowded homes or aren't familiar with the technology. There's some other new technologies that are being considered. One is called tunnel roads, some new technologies for digging tunnels. And people propose that cities will have networks of highways under the ground, or pneumatic tube transports, such as Hyperloop, capsules that will transport through a vacuum tube at very high speeds. There are a number of aviation innovations, things like air taxis, little autonomous helicopters or vertical takeoff and landing vehicles that proponents predict will be used for suburbanites to work to commute to their jobs downtown, or people running quick errands. There's also supersonic jets. There are companies that are planning to introduce small supersonic jets for commercial operation. There's also delivery drones, small little helicopters that can transport goods. So the proponents often present these as exciting new technologies, but in practice, there's good reasons to be skeptical. You might appreciate, for example, delivery drones if they're delivering critical medicine to an isolated location. But how are you going to feel when your neighbor starts ordering pizza and beer for late night parties using little delivery drones? And what happens when one of them drops its load or crashes? How many failures will a community accept for some of these new technologies? Another new technology is applying new apps and new pricing payment mechanisms and new information resources to prioritize vehicle travel and to prioritize parking. There's a lot of discussion among transportation professionals on what is the most efficient way how we should prioritize travel, especially urban highway travel, to maximize efficiency. And new technologies allow this to occur. HOV lanes and road pricing and curb and parking management. Are we going to use this, and how? And how are we going to make sure that it maximizes community benefits and helps achieve our social equity goals? And finally, there's freight transport management, what we call freight logistics. Now, freight travel represents less than 10% of all vehicle travel, but about 1/3 of all fuel consumption and emissions. So, and freight vehicles contribute a lot of road wear and accident risk and air pollution and congestion. So there are good reasons to apply new technologies that increase the efficiency of the transportation system. That's freight logistical management. So in my book, I rate all these different technologies based on a number of evaluation criteria. I rate them on a scale from +3 to -3. And this is what the summary table looks like. And this graph shows what their total ratings look like if you sum those ratings up. And what my analysis suggests is that the active and micro modes help achieve the greatest range of benefits: public transit, vehicle mobility prioritization, mobility as a service, logistics management, and vehicle sharing. Those all provide a wide range of benefits. They're resource efficient, they are affordable, they are available for a wide range of users. That makes them high. Means that they rate high using this multi-criteria evaluation framework, where telework, ride-hailing, electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, pneumatic tube transport, and aviation innovations tend to be more resource intensive. They require more road space, more public infrastructure. They tend to require more energy, and they tend to they are less affordable and less likely to provide social equity benefits. That's what my research indicates. So related-ish question is, to what degree do these new mobilities increase or reduce total vehicle travel, and therefore the external costs, things like traffic congestion and accident risk and pollution? And you can look through these technologies. Some of them do reduce vehicle travel, sometimes quite significantly, but others tend to stimulate or induce additional vehicle travel. So these are all factors that need to be considered when we analyze and prioritize these new transportation technologies and services. So here are my conclusions. The first is that vehicle innovations tend to be implemented more slowly than the other technologies, where, for example, it only took less than a decade for digital cameras to replace film cameras, and for smartphones to replace flip phones, and for personal computers to become common. In their age, their penetration of the market was fairly quick. Vehicles generally take longer because an automobile typically costs 50 or 100 times as much as a mobile phone or a digital camera, and it lasts 10 times or more longer. And motor vehicle travel imposes more public costs and safety risks than personal computers or digital phones or digital cameras. So there are good reasons that it takes longer for the vehicle technologies to be developed, approved, and marketed and influence the fleet. Most vehicle innovations, when they first become available, are unreliable and expensive. So it often takes many years for things like automatic transmissions or airbags or vehicle navigation systems to become reliable enough and cheap enough that they become common in the vehicle fleet. And now optimists predict that autonomous electric taxis will soon be cheap and ubiquitous and replace most vehicle travel. But my research suggests that it's likely to take much longer than optimistic predictions have been. And most of the optimistic predictions are made by people with a financial interest in that industry. And so there's good reasons to be skeptical. There's considerable uncertainty about the benefits and costs and the travel impacts of some of these new mobilities. And advocates tend to exaggerate their benefits by ignoring many of the costs and the risks and the rebound effects, the tendency of some of the electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles to increase total vehicle travel. Now, some of the new mobilities support, but others contradict some of our strategic goals. For example, some of them are likely to stimulate more sprawl and increase total infrastructure costs and reduce the mobility options available to non-drivers, where others increase those. So that framework, it's important to use a comprehensive framework. So many of the potential benefits of new mobilities depend on our public policies. If we want to maximize the benefits, we're going to have to be able to critically analyze and limit some of these new mobilities. In fact, the most glamorous modes, things like self-driving cars and air taxis and hyperloops and supersonic jets, are actually unlikely to be very useful or beneficial or even fun. For example, the hyperloop, often presented as this exciting new technology, it'll require passengers to be locked into little capsules that'll accelerate fast enough that some people are likely to be nauseous. And once it's underway, passengers won't be able to exit, or it's unlikely that you can have onboard services. So for a lot of people, it'll actually be unpleasant and uncomfortable to travel in some of these new transportation technologies. So it's the modest forms of transportation, the active travel, micro modes, public transit improvements, vehicle sharing, transportation prioritization. Those are the transportation innovations that are most likely to provide the greatest range of benefits and help achieve our strategic goals. Now, what does this suggest for public policies? Well, there's a lot of discussion among transportation professionals how to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks of some of these new technologies. It's important that they be tested and regulated for safety and efficiency. We want to do critical analysis of all the impacts. We want to make sure that we're not focusing only on long trips, that we're doing as much to improve the local and the short trip travel as the high speed long-term travel. We want to, if to the degree that some of these reduce vehicle ownership and use, we can use them as an opportunity to reduce parking requirements, and that's a huge benefit. And we want to plan and price to favor the resource efficient modes. So there's a lot of discussion about some of these, and this is not my book is not the only publication on this. In fact, those of you in Seattle should be proud that your city is one of the leaders in trying to analyze and prepare for the new mobilities. There's what's called the New Mobilities Playbook, and it evaluates many of these same mobilities and critically examines how they're likely to support or contradicts Seattle's strategic goals. And it identifies some specific municipal policies to ensure that the new mobilities support those goals. So it's a great example, and I recommend other communities embark on this type of community-based analysis to prepare for these new transportation technologies and services. So that was a lot of information in a short period of time. If you want more information that I presented on some of what I presented, there are free reports available on our website, the Victoria Transport Policy Institute website, vtpi.org. Some of my reports that look at how past technologies have affected our lives and our communities, predictions of how autonomous vehicles are likely to affect us, and analyzing some of the various costs. So that is my slideshow. And now I hope we can go to some discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was a lot of information, but a lot of really interesting information. And it drummed up a lot of great questions from the audience. So we'll get started. The first question that came in started with great presentation, Todd, which I second. I'm about to commence a federal role in AV policy. What is the big question or questions today I should be challenging my new bosses with when I start?
Right. So that's a very timely issue. And one way to start is to read my report, Autonomous Vehicle Implementation Predictions, Implications for Transport Planning, available free on my website. And it outlines some of these issues. Of course, what we want to do is be able to critically examine how long it's likely to take before reliable, affordable, self-driving cars are really available. So optimists tend to, I think, exaggerate the claim that those will be available within a few years. I think it'll take longer. Critically examine the costs, including infrastructure costs, what governments are going to have to spend for things like self-driving or dedicated traffic lanes. Questions about risks. So to what degree do they introduce new risks? Do they increase total vehicle travel? I think they would, unless we have roadway pricing to discourage people to send their self-driving cars to circle the block to save parking costs. We need to look at how they affect the cityscape, the quality of life, livability. So how are self-driving cars likely to affect pedestrian travel and bicycling? And to what degree should we favor the shared version, the self-driving taxis, over people owning their own self-driving vehicles? Those are just a few of the questions that come up. We can dedicate a whole future town hall meeting to self-driving cars, but why don't we go on to some other questions?
Sure. The next question starts with, I had not considered that policy decisions which force people into cars for commuting to work should be considered as a regressive policy. With that in mind, it seems that one of the arguments for investing in transit is that it is a progressive means to increase lower income individuals and families' well-being. How do we incorporate that logic into the cost-benefit analysis when we debate transit policy?
Right. So I will approach this a little differently and say that an efficient and equitable transportation system provides travelers with diverse travel options and incentives to use the most efficient mode for each trip. So to be efficient and fair, a city should guarantee that people can get around, can run local errands by walking and bicycling and micro modes, so e-bikes. So you've got really good sidewalks and bike paths and bicycle parking and things like that. And efficient public transit when you're traveling from one neighbor to another. And that means incentives for people who own a car. Well, first of all, that it is efficient to get around your city without a car. So people who, for whatever reason, can't drive or don't want to drive or can't afford a car, have good quality public transit when they're going throughout the region. And incentives, so even people that do own a car will be encouraged to use public transit when they can. So they're reducing that roadway congestion, and they're reducing parking requirements, and they're reducing accident risk and air pollution. So right now, North America is pretty lousy at providing those incentives. The Puget Sound region is better than most because you do have your commute trip reduction policies and programs, and you do have some HOV lanes and some incentives. But what one of the categories that of the new mobilities, that's mobility prioritization, emphasize the efficiency and the equity benefits that you get if you provide those incentives. Put differently, there's only so much road space. Everybody benefits, including people who want to drive, benefits if their neighbors use public transportation when they're taking trips on those congested, busy corridors. So I think public transit improvements are key, are essential, but not by themselves. It's part of an integrated system that includes incentives, and it includes improved walking and bicycling and micro modes.
All right, the next question is about autonomous vehicles again. It is, what value is are autonomous vehicles to an individual? Why would I pay significantly more for an autonomous vehicle? What's the utility? And then someone else engaged in conversation with that, asking questions about whether or not it's considered more of a service rather than something, using autonomous vehicles for services like taxis and those types of things versus owning them, and just what your thoughts are on that and sort of how you envision the rollout of autonomous vehicles.
Right. So that's actually the big question that we're debating is, should we expect that this new technology is going to allow the people will buy their own self-driving car and use it inevitably to drive more, to travel more annual miles, because, for example, it would make a, let's say a 90-minute commute would be fine because you're gonna just take a nap or get some work done while your car is driving you to work. So some people would use it to have these super commutes, super long distance commutes. And or you would send it, have your car take your kids to soccer practice. And so there's tremendous potential. And I think there's tremendous potential for affluent people to use this for convenience and expanding their travel. And there are dangers that that's going to increase a lot of these external costs. Now, on the other hand, if autonomous vehicles are used primarily for shared vehicles, autonomous buses and autonomous taxis, then they could become part of a lever, part of a set, a suite of travel options that allow most households to go car free, to not own their own car, and to rely on some combination of e-bikes and bicycles and self-driving taxis and shared taxi or micro transit and conventional transit. I think that policymakers are going to need to understand this, and that the communities will be made worse off, that we will have transportation hell, as some people describe it, if we just let autonomous vehicles drive everywhere with no pricing reforms and no restrictions, nothing that favors the shared version. But we could make a lot of progress toward transportation heaven if we use the efficiencies and the savings of autonomous vehicles to make public transit and taxi services much more affordable and convenient, and therefore create this very efficient, multimodal, accessible, affordable transportation system. So it's going to be up to us. Your community controls the road space. It controls things like parking requirements. And those have tremendous leverage on whether it's more attractive to have your own vehicle, your own self-driving car, or to rely on shared self-driving cars.
All right, switching gears a little bit to talk from autonomous vehicles. Vehicle sharing programs, including bike and scooter sharing, have come and gone over the years without much success. China overestimated demand, effectively trashing millions of bicycles, and US programs have mostly flopped or don't provide convenience. How do you see these succeeding in the future, if at all?
Right, yeah, I mean, it started even longer ago with the excitement about segways and how we were all going to be traveling with segways, and that disappeared. Yes, bicycle and scooter sharing have a lot of practical complications. And in order to, I do think that they have demonstrated that they can function in some communities, and they can play important roles, especially providing that what we call the last mile, say from a bus stop or train station to your destination for some trips. I mean, that's great. In order for this to work, you need that critical mass, so enough people are using those services that they can make a profit, or at least aren't losing, they don't require very much excessive subsidies. So I think they become more successful if we have the incentives so people own fewer cars and drive less and rely more on this suite of other modes, including walking and bicycling and micro modes and public transit. So if, for example, the average person, instead of owning a car, the average person relies primarily on public transit, several times a week, they're likely to use a bike share as part of their public transit trips. And then you get that ridership and that the efficiency and profitability. But it is each community, some communities, the regular bikes have been, bike shares have been successful. Others, their e-bikes are successful, and others it's e-scooters. So I think we're going to need to experiment and to create those incentives to maximize the demand.
Yeah, it's been interesting in Seattle to watch it cycle through the different options. We recently have had the scooters take over.
On the other hand, we are unafraid to subsidize a car trip with that very expensive parking space that we require at the destination. And we're accustomed to subsidizing public transit. So we shouldn't really be prejudiced against any of the new mobilities, including things like bike sharing, simply because it's the new mode. So if, for example, we were in the habit of subsidizing a bus trip for, say, $1 a trip, we should be willing to subsidize a bike share trip up to that amount, if that is what that person needs. I recognize that there are complications, and we don't want to necessarily subsidize all, say low value recreational bicycling, but certainly to the degree that bike sharing or scooter sharing can reduce some automobile trips and reduce those costs, it may be a worthwhile subsidy. We should not be prejudiced against something like bike sharing.
So we have time for one more question, and I think it's a good, pretty open-ended one that gives you room to kind of go where you want. What is the public investment required for each of the mobility technologies to maximize their adoption? How do we choose between the options, and which gives the best bang for the buck, since we can't invest in all emerging technologies?
Right. Well, that's a great question. And it's even more complicated because, for one thing, a lot of the investments aren't money. They're things like road space. And you could even call parking minimums. So the zoning codes that require developers to provide off-street parking are a form, they're essentially a tax or a government allocation of resources to favor one particular mode. So it is a complicated issue, and every situation is unique. We might be willing to invest quite a bit on, for example, a public transit improvement in one area where it would not be cost effective to provide that service elsewhere, and similarly with bike sharing or car sharing. So this is really the question that transportation professionals and policymakers are going to have to struggle with, is how to evaluate the full costs and benefits of each of the new transportation innovations, and how to optimize, how to make sure we're getting the best net value, the greatest benefits at the least cost. And that's what, if at that graph that I showed, which summarized the ratings that I assigned those different modes, it shows that it's the smaller, slower, resource efficient mobilities, things like electric bikes and public transit improvements and bike sharing and car sharing. Those provide the greatest range of benefits to users, and including users and to their communities. So I think it's going to be important for us to have this conversation and to develop the frameworks so we can prioritize. We can say that the affordable, resource efficient modes, like improving walking and bicycling and public transit and bike sharing, those are the ones we want to support. And some of those new technologies, like flying cars and hyperloops and tunnel roads, they may be appropriate in very specific situations, but I think we should be very skeptical of the proponents' claims that they're going to provide these, that they're going to be very affordable and safe and convenient, and overlooking many of the costs. So that's really what my analysis is all about. If anybody has more questions, they can visit our website and find out some of the other research I've done on the subject, and you can buy my book.
Exactly. But thank you so much for spending this time with us, and on behalf of Town Hall, the staff, and our audience. Really, this was really fascinating, and you covered a lot. But I do encourage folks, there's got to be a lot more in the book, so do go pick up a copy from Island Press. We have a link in the chat of this video, and don't forget that you can get a little discount right now if you want to grab it soon. It sounds like potentially up to 30% off, or maybe even 50. There's sounds like there's many.
50% off this week.
50% off this week. And then
30% off if you write webinar in the coupon, in the discount cell if you order it online.
so we really encourage you to check that out and to buy directly from Island Press. So once again, Todd Litman, thank you so much for sharing this evening, and have a great night, everybody.
Thank you all.